Hello, you are with the Out of the Box show. Our topic today is the mysteries of the solar system. Today, sending missions to all planets is the latest fashion. Almost all countries are launching probes and talking actively of inhabiting some of these planets. The question is, can humans exist in such conditions and, therefore, what do some essential perceptions of the humans who will eventually inhabit some of these places look like? Today, we will examine the taste, odor, and sounds of the various bodies in the solar system, and we will even consider their beauty and appeal from our human perspective. The guest in our studio is Professor Boyko Rangelov. Welcome, Professor. Dear Professor, how do we gather information about the mysteries surrounding the planets in our solar system?
It turns out that we know a lot more about the planets of the solar system than we do about the depths of our Earth. But that's not the point. The important thing is that the information from the various spacecraft visiting some of these closer or further solar system bodies allows us to determine parameters, which at first glance seem absolutely incomprehensible and impossible, such as odor, taste. It even comes to such relative concepts as beauty and attractiveness, which are purely subjective perceptions. Since ancient times, people have paid attention that the evening and morning star Venus looks very attractive. Mars is reddish, and because of its blood color they named him after the war god. These are things that we now know with the help of the various space missions and probes sent to near or far vicinities, while with the probes that landed on some planets such information becomes more and more available. However, the things registered by the probes are peculiar. How could they be transformed into human perceptions? These are the organoleptic senses of what smells like what its color looks like, what sound it makes. These are things which are impossible for objects without atmosphere, because all our senses are adapted to perceive, to indicate things or properties like smell, taste, you name it, only in the atmosphere. Where there is no atmosphere, this normal state of ours does not work. That is why the scientists devised ways to transform the information about distant objects into things we are familiar with.
How?
This is done in several ways. First and most fundamental of all, it is important to examine the chemical composition of the observed object. Chemical analyses can be very different in their nature. These are various spectroscopic methods with reflected light, penetrating light, spectral analyses of various parameters.
And what is the most difficult thing about this examination?
The most difficult thing is the sufficient accuracy. That is, you find something that should increase the accuracy to be sure that what you are getting is true. Here, science has made spectacular progress too. Some chemical methods allow detecting a single molecule in a volume that is millions of times larger than the molecule itself. This is done with sensitive sensors that can detect such effects. I will give you an earthly example. Recently, many people in airports noticed that every now and then, on a purely random basis, one of the airport security officers says, "Put your hands forward," and touches your hands with a pointer from above and below, even touches your clothes, and says, "Wait." Then he goes and sticks the pointer into a spectroscope and sees whether you've touched drugs. And this is normal, because even if you have touched such substances days ago, molecules remaining on your clothes or on your fingers are immediately detected, because, I'm saying it again, the sensitivity of some of these methods is monstrous. All these achievements on Earth are also applied remotely in many ways. The spacecraft can pass by and measure the reflection from the surface of the planet. It can pass by and emit a laser pulse that is received back and gives information which part of the laser beam spectrum is absorbed and which is not. All this allows us to determine the chemical composition. From there on, things are simpler. Transformations. For example, we know which chemicals our nose perceives. Let's start with odor. Some chemicals smell nice, some not so nice, and some are extremely unpleasant. The sensitivity of our nose is extreme, so everything works perfect. And when you know the chemical composition of some body, you can automatically translate the composition of the chemicals into odor. By the way, the same is true for taste. Last year, the Nobel Prize was awarded to people who explained why our tongues sense hot or cold. It is sensitivity, a sense pattern transformed as taste from the tongue to the brain. In the same way, you can measure whether one chili pepper is hotter than another. It turned out that this is not a simple task, which is why these people deserved the Nobel Prize.
What about the sound?
It is even more complicated. Here on Earth, we hear sounds only because our ears are adapted to perceive the elastic waves transmitted in the air. This is the way to hear something. Everywhere. Well, some planets don't have atmospheres. Although this is true for the planets closest to the Sun. For example, Mercury has practically no atmosphere. The Moon, too. Venus has. Mars has. True, they are very thin and weak, which means that you will hear much quieter sounds. But on the other hand, there are technological processes that allow us to derive sounds. For example, a spectral analysis is made of the waves that are registered on the Moon during an earthquake, or when a meteorite falls. A crash is heard when it falls. You'd hear this crash if the Moon had an atmosphere. The Moon has no atmosphere, but the spectral composition of the generated vibrations is easily transformed into audible sounds that we can hear. We hear in a very narrow range. Our eyes see in a very narrow spectral range. Our taste is. It is the richest sense, but you can't lick Neptune or Pluto, let's say. But, here there is a mystery too. I couldn't name it great success. Humans already tasted the Moon. American astronauts licked and smelled lunar samples as soon as they landed on the Moon. They did this before getting them into the lunar module and before putting them in the oxygen environment. The astronauts smelled and licked them then, because after a while these properties are lost. So, the initial odor is of gunpowder. Why? Well, if you remember, as children we used to play and knock two stones. When we knock two quartz stones such as flint, they begin to smell of gunpowder. Well, exactly the same was the smell of the first samples of the Moon felt by the American astronauts. Only in a few days, this smell is gone. The sulfur, which gives this smell of gunpowder, comes into contact with the air, and this smell is no longer felt.
You mentioned the Moon. What does current research show? What are the specifics of the Moon when we talk about taste, odor, sound, and beauty?
Yes, we already talked about the taste, and about the odor. We clarified that it is of gunpowder, and that the samples smelled like nothing after their odor evaporates, so to speak. The taste is somewhat sour, like licking a match. This is the rough sensation that is known. On the other hand, the sounds vary a lot. Earthquakes of a different nature occur there. They rumble in different ways, and all this can be transformed into sounds that can be heard. Occasionally, meteorites fall, which would make sounds like boom, or thump, or ping. It doesn't matter, but this all can be heard. In this sense, the Moon is best studied. And, unfortunately, its properties make it not a very attractive place to inhabit. Now the attention of the scientists is focused on Venus or on Mars. Venus turned out to be very sour. It has a sour taste. There it rains virtually sulfuric acid. The quantity of carbon dioxide is huge, and it traps light, rises the temperature, and makes Venus practically uninhabitable. There, the degrees on the surface of the planet are over 400 Celsius. Imagine being put in 400 degrees here. Not pleasant, is it? That is why Mars seems the most promising from this point of view, because at least its temperature is not so high. We can protect ourselves from the cold with clothes. On the other hand, protecting from the heat is not that easy. It takes a lot of energy to keep us comfortable. Mars also tastes like Earth's volcanoes, so to speak. If anyone has ever tried it, I did such experiments as a child. It tastes like clay, a little like rust. So Mars looks like this too. Mercury is most similar to the Moon in taste, odor and sound. Now we come to the finer topic of beauty and attractiveness. Of course, these are subjective concepts. Some people like the cratered surface of the moon, some don't. But, generally, in the ranking of the planets, Venus is considered beautiful, Mars is considered not so beautiful, and moving away to the giant planets, which are actually gas structures, the things get harder and more complicated. External beauty increases, but on the other hand, the conditions, the odor and the sounds become very harsh.
Tell us, what do you mean?
Right away. Jupiter, which is the largest giant planet in the solar system, has an atmosphere, which is evident from the missions that manage to get close and analyze it. It contains a lot of ammonia and other very unpleasantly smelling gases. So, among other things, that spot over there that looks like an eye. The orange-brown thing is a hurricane that originated over hundreds of years ago. And it continues to swirl today. That is, the speed of the wind on Jupiter reaches about 1,000 kilometers per hour, which means that you can never stand on this planet. The winds will blow you away. You'd have to have an anchor or something. The properties of the more distant planets are similar. On Saturn and Uranus. Actually, this is where the legend comes to my mind. According to ancient Greek mythology, Saturn is the son of Uranus, and he castrated him to take his place. For such analogies between legends of ancient Greece and space objects, the people who discovered these planets had something in mind to name them like this. These two planets, apart from being very cold, the temperature there is about -200 degrees. For Saturn, it is particularly known that it virtually wheezes. Heavy wheezing is heard, as from sick man's lungs that are full of water and other unpleasant liquids. Its smell is very vile. Word goes about rotten fish, corpse gas, intestinal gas, things that are not at all pleasant to our nose. And, on the other hand, the most unusual planet in the solar system is definitely Saturn, with its rings. Something that strongly attracts attention and, because of which it is considered the most beautiful planet, is the color and unusualness of those rings that revolve around it. By the way, all giant planets have rings. Some are more visible, some not so. Most unusual is the planet with rings perpendicular to its orbit. I don't remember if it was Uranus or Neptune, but it doesn't matter. Now that's really strange. Generally, according to the theory of the formation of the solar system, everything revolves in one orbit, around which the heavy objects aggregate into larger bodies, while the smaller ones remain as rings around them. And the other mystery is about that vertical position. There's no logic to how any centrifugal or centripetal force would keep them perpendicular to the orbit of the planet. Absolutely inexplicable story. The other thing about all these gas giants is that their rings are from solid bodies. That is, their atmosphere is gaseous. They themselves as planets are gaseous, true, under high pressure. Maybe this high pressure inside turns these gases into pieces of ice, but rocks are orbiting around them. How they got there and why they stay there, modern science has few explanations. In fact, the planets closest to the Sun are solid, which means that they are rocky planets, while those further away are gaseous. There is logic here. The heavier aggregates clustered closer to the Sun. The lighter ones, which are only gases, clustered farther from the Sun. But there is an exception to this too. Pluto suddenly turns out to be a solid planet. Well now, the logic is suddenly gone. This is not that important. The important thing is that now we can imagine what awaits us on these planets if we get there. It turns out that a lot of trouble awaits us. Unfortunately, there is no other such fabulous planet like Earth in our solar system. That is, the odors and the sounds that we will hear, and the sounds that we will hear, I already said that, and the taste, all these are extremely unpleasant to our physiological senses. This leads us to think that it is good to protect our Earth and, no matter how much we want to colonize other planets, it probably won't be very pleasant for the first pioneers that would conquer them.
But I want us to go back to Venus and talk about color, sound, and odor.
Yes. Venus has a sour taste, a very sour taste at that. The color is gray-white, mainly due to carbon dioxide, which forms crystals or even vapors. And the smell is generally unpleasant. There is ammonia, i.e. it smells like a toilet, unfortunately. What was next?
What is the sound?
The sound? Earthquakes were recorded on Venus, i.e. there may be vibrations inside, but the sounds of winds dominate there. Strong winds blow, and the howl that we know from every hurricane on Earth is typical for Venus.
Mercury?
There are no winds on Mercury, or if there are, you can't feel them, but
What is the sound of this planet?
the sound is similar to that of the moon, it reverberates. The sound is like hitting two stones, which is understandable. And this sound is mainly made by falling meteorites. Mercury has internal structure that doesn't generate earthquakes that could be detected. However, Mars is the exact opposite. Several Martian quakes were registered. The last satellites the missions that landed, Perseverance, or whatever, along with the helicopter. There is dust on Mars, while the surface of Mercury is just like stepping on red-hot iron, or rather a red-hot volcano.
And what does Mercury taste like?
Sour again, like the moon. The same composition gives practically the same taste. The moon and Mercury are extremely similar in organoleptic properties, so to say.
Jupiter and Saturn?
The situation is worse there. Vile odors. Very vile. Unaccustomed noses like ours shall suffer.
And what is the taste like?
The taste is sour again. Sour tastes dominate, because in the entire solar system acidic substances are found more often than alkaline ones. I don't know the reason, but it obviously comes to composition. Maybe we should look here at what the chemical composition is. Here, for example, on Jupiter it is hydrogen-helium, hydrogen sulfide, unpleasant smell of rotten eggs, ammonia as in the toilet, phosphine that is even more unpleasant, it is often found in hair colorants. Hydrogen cyanide, which smells like poison, so the smell of Jupiter is a heavy stench of rotten eggs, intestinal gas, urine, rotten fish, all extremely unpleasant. Taste is sour-bitter. Sour dominates, but there are also bitter notes. The sound is a roar with a low-frequency hum and frightening sounds. About the beauty, Jupiter is generally a colorful planet. Silver, white and yellow-brown streaks from storms and hurricanes dominate. That is somewhat attractive, but only from a side. There is nothing particularly attractive, except this appearance, which is seen by spacecrafts flying towards it. Saturn has practically the same chemical composition with added ammonium hydrosulfide and, again, this leads to the same odor as before, plus elements of bitter almonds because of hydrogen cyanide, which is a strong poison. That is, the atmosphere of Saturn is quite poisonous from our point of view. About the beauty, we already mentioned that Saturn is one of the most beautiful planets. However, it would be fine if we looked at Titan, which is a satellite of Saturn. Why? Because geyser eruptions are observed there. This means that there is water. Ice and water. This directly leads to the hypothesis that maybe there is life. That is why Titan, and Europe too, attract the special attention of scientists. But on the other hand, Titan smells like a gas station. Because of the presence of methyl acetylene, cyanacetylene and other liquid substances. Its taste is extremely unpleasant. Nevertheless, the sounds heard on Titan are of hissing geysers. Because they periodically erupt, and they erupt at a height of about 20 kilometers. Can you imagine a geyser erupting 20 kilometers high? Otherwise, it is the space body that looks the most like Earth. Its color is bluish-brown violet. It has different colors, unlike the other gas giants. So, from this point of view, it is most similar to Earth and attracts our attention with its similarity. Uranus and Neptune are very similar to Jupiter and Saturn and are generally unattractive. No appeal whatsoever. However, spacecrafts manage to deliver information about more distant objects as well.
Comets?
Comets, for example, that come from who knows where. By the way, we already found comets known to come from outside the solar system. They are just balls of ice and dirt, or, in our language, ice and rock. And, while evaporating, they taste and sound like vaporizing bodies. That is, they are simmering, so to speak, on the one hand. On the other hand, since there is water, ice and water, their smell is not quite unpleasant. But, in general, people are not inclined to inhabit comets for now. They are only interesting because they carry information from the far parts of space. And one more thing, from the point of view of our topic, the most interesting are the distant objects. That is, there are some data, information allowing people to imagine what some distant galaxies in the form of nebulae or gas clouds look like. I remember, maybe 30 to 40 years ago, the first person to detect the presence of alcohol in space was the Bulgarian space scientist, Professor Mitko Gogashev from Stara Zagora. He was the first to detect alcohol, vapors in the nebula. I'll tell you now, Sagittarius B2. And this was one of the first Bulgarian publications in Nature, the most authoritative journal for natural sciences. And then some people joked that space people go to this galaxy to drink alcohol. It meant that there is alcohol there too. But the special thing is that one alcohol molecule, for example, is found in a volume of 1 square cubic kilometers or more. All is so diluted that you must have a very special nose to detect the smell of alcohol. One more thing. There were chemical composition data showing that, apart from the ethyl alcohol detected by him with the launched spectrometer, there are also formaldehyde, formic and acetic acid, which means that this nebula would taste somewhat like pickles. And then it was said that we have a salad with pickles, no, pickles with brandy, and such jokes were widely told in the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, but this shows that science has no limits.
Are there any more mysteries? Last question.
Oh, here we may need a second episode, because the more we know about the solar system, the more the mysteries are. The biggest mystery to me is the existence of Earth. So far we described all the other planets, how unpleasant, in fact repulsive they are, but in fact the Earth is an oasis that has created the conditions where we exist. What caused? What are the cosmic forces that caused the Earth to look this way? No one knows. The purpose was hardly to provide comfort to mankind, but who knows? Perhaps we are the product of some experiment of higher extraterrestrial forces.
Thank you very much for this conversation.
I thank you.
That was all of today's Out of the Box. Stay with ETV until our next meeting.